Okay then, so now that we have our little asset pretty much modelled, it's time to head back over to our trim sheet and adjust these initial layout to try and more accurately fit what we've got here. Okay, so at the moment, from what we've modelled, there's some extra thin bits here, like around the edges here. And so I think we can make a few different adjustments to this. Like I say, this was just an initial guide. So first of all, I'm going to grab this top one, and I'm just going to go to vertexes or face, and I'm just going to make this half as wide. So I'm just going to snap that to the grid there, and then I think I'll duplicate this. So I've got two of them. So that'll pretty much be the edges around here, and maybe even the silver edges. But I'll have a few different options of silver, I think. Now these don't necessarily have to run across the whole thing. I mean, that is just in case we did want some tiling edges on there. So what I'll do is this first piece here is going to have beveled edges. So I'm just going to grab the top, go Control F10, and then I'm going to bevel these edges. Just have a small bevel on that, 0.12. And I'm going to make this one so that it tiles endlessly. So all I'm going to do is just grab this edge and just drag it off like that, so that it becomes outside the bounds of the projection in Substance Painter. So because this is one-to-one on the UV grid, this is outside that UV grid and outside the edge of this. So we will get no baking or edge details on this. It'll seem like it just carries on forever. The normals will carry on flat, and there won't be any ambient occlusion or anything on the edges there. So I think I'm also going to grab the second piece here and just move that down to the bottom. And this is actually going to be a bevel, like a panel bevel, so that I can make an alpha map with it and just lay that over the surface as a floating decal map to create the illusion that there is extra bevels in the surface. So I'll make that now. What I'm going to do is just select all the bottom faces and delete them. So we just have this, and you can move it down, don't have to have it really high. And then what I'm going to do is grab these two edges and do a cut. Okay, and then I'm going to bevel that cut on it too. Now with stuff like this, it doesn't matter so much exactly how big you make it. You want to try and keep everything similar across the whole thing, but you will be scaling this up and down anyway, so you do get a little bit of flexibility with it. It's not completely rigid. And I'm going to bevel the bottom of it just to give the bottom of this a little bit of surface as well, so it's just not a completely flat edge. So this will be representing a panel cut, and I might even make some extra details on this as well. So what I'm going to do is just grab these edges, connect, so I'm going to split it in half, edge, connect, and half again, and then I'm going to put a connection in here and then bevel that just to a tiny amount. Now remember, when you're using the fraction, if you just grab it, it'll move quite fast, but if you want to slow that down, you can hold Control to make a much slower movement. You also have this here which changes the movement speed. You just click that little icon to change how fast that movement is, how fast the numbers scroll up. So I'm just trying to make some shapes in here. I'm not 100% sure what I want from this. Just merge them to the center. So I just want this to be some sort of line where the like a mechanical weld or something like that, or some sort of clip or access point to a screw, a hidden screw or something like that, just to make it look a little bit more detailed. And this is the kind of thing that is difficult to do, difficult to come up with if you're only doing it for the first time. Now, people that make these trim sheets all the time will definitely get like a visual or like a mental library on certain mechanical joins and injection molding shapes and stuff like that, and things that look quite real. And you can only really do that by practicing and just researching, gathering references for stuff like that, and eventually you'll be able to just do that kind of stuff automatically. So don't stress if you find it really difficult to make these sci-fi details right now, because that kind of thing will come naturally if you do a lot more of this. Now again, if you're following along, you don't need to do exactly what I'm doing. You can make up your own kind of details, go wild with them, but just make sure that when you're making them, you're remembering to harden edges that you want hard, so that you don't have odd smoothing in places that we really don't want smoothing. Now, with any details that you do, any bevels that you do, never do them at a 90-degree angle. So if we've got this angle here, if we just go like that, what will happen is when we bake that down in Substance Painter, it's only going to bake the rays exactly down towards that normal, which is the underlying trim sheet. So this flat plane, it's only going to go in one direction. So anything like that has no edge whatsoever, you will not be able to see it. So if we just jump out of this view and go to the top view, so let's select our item here and zoom in. Now we can see without wireframe on, we can see the bevels on that, but on this side it's absolutely invisible, and that's what will happen in your Substance Painter and your final bake. You'll have no difference between the normal here and the normal there. It just won't be able to distinguish between the height. So we need this bevel here to show, or to fool it into having some depth there. And this can be as high poly as you want, because this is literally just going to be the bake. It doesn't need to be unwrapped or anything like that. It's just going into Substance Painter to be baked. So you can add as much detail to it as you like. The more the better. Again, I'm just doing some random details. I've got no proper plan here. Just whatever I feel looks nice. And if you want to make sure that your verts have definitely merged, you can just grab one and move it and see if there's anything else. But if you don't need the edge, you could double click it, Control and backspace, and if it removes neatly, then you know that's worked just fine. I'm just going to move this to match that one. There we go. So we've got two different little bevel pieces that we can use around various parts. And we could probably move them a bit closer together, but they're really simple. And next I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to bevel some of the edges of these ones again. So normally I don't bevel these edges here, because what happens then is if you've got a few blocks together, if we come down here, say to these, if I bevel all the edges, which you'd normally do on a panel in 3D, what you end up doing is having this hole here, and that can kind of show up if you're not super neat with your polys, and oftentimes you're going to be mapping this to a single poly. So what you'll end up having is this blank area in the corner of your poly. So I find it much better to just select the very top face, the edges around the very top face, and just bevel them, and that way we don't end up with a gap between each panel. Makes it much easier to texture and apply back to our model. For now, I'm just going to go around and bevel some of these and just try and get the sizes of them right. So even though I have done these details here, for the rest of this I'm just going to leave off any details other than the bevels, and the bevels just help me see exactly where these panels start and stop, because obviously the normals won't show up otherwise. If they're just flat like this, the normals will just look flat, and the normals are the best way to really map stuff accurately because they're very neat looking compared to, say, the textures. So I'm just going to bevel these. I'm just going to run through each one of these and bevel them as is. Now I think the sizing of these will be right. So that's all I'm really worried about right now. So I've got a few small pieces. Could probably do with one even slightly smaller. So I probably don't need all of these that I've got here at the moment. So I'm going to delete one out and just give myself some breathing room. And I'm going to take these ones and move them up one. Grab these edges and just make a really, really thin piece. So if you're moving something with a bevel and you've grabbed all these polys, all these vertexes, if you then try to move that, say snap that to a grid, you will find that it'll move it too far because it's going to take the center point of all your selection. So then you need to just move this pivot to the piece, an outer piece, and then snap it, and that way you'll get a nice snap. So just remember that selection sets won't have the pivot exactly where you want them. But for this I actually want to go in, and there's no grid left anyway, so I'm just going to eyeball this. So it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. Now, if we've not got anything to snap to in the grid and you do want this to be perfect, one thing we could do is just make a temporary cut. So if we just grab the edges of this and cut here, connect them, what we could do is go back to our vertex selection. Next, she's got the pivot snapped in the right place there. And then we could snap that to that edge and then delete that edge that we put in, and now we've got that in the right place, so it's bang on in the center of that model. So I'm going to reset my pivot on this, and I'm going to move that to that corner, and then I'm going to duplicate this. So I've got two extra small ones now, and then I'm going to come back here and start to bevel the rest of these. So I will be speeding up some of this video, and don't worry if your panels don't match exactly to mine. Just get your panels in and bevel the edges, and you can have plenty of liberty with how you decide to do this. Okay then, so at the moment we have some duplicates of just strips here, just simple panels for now. These ones all tile endlessly in one way. You know, I might change that eventually. And then we've got some panels here as well, and I'm going to leave the rest for now. I'm just going to make I'm going to make two little decal pieces that I definitely know I need. So one of them is that I know that I want rivets around this, and I also know that I want a slot or some sort of rigid area, because I think that is often useful. What I'll do is I'll make the ridge here, because that doesn't need to be a decal. And again, you know, I'm saying this, but this is a really rough idea of what I want. I'm thinking I might want this stuff, or this might be useful, but I don't actually know that until, you know, I start actually getting this together. And maybe even by the time I get to my second or third model using this same trim sheet is when I'll really have a good solid understanding of what needs to be on this trim sheet. So just don't stress about it. You know, I'm going to show you with this. You'll know that we will have a decent understanding of just how flexible these are and how to go back and change this stuff. You know, that's the most important thing. And then I'm going to make a rivet as well, and a little slots for the front of this. So I just need a little cylinder. This can be pretty big, you know, to hold the detail, but it still is pretty small on the overall size of the map. It doesn't need to be actual size, so you don't need to make it actual size on the rivets on these. You can make it a little bit bigger, because even when you get close up, one of your panels might become blurry. Having the rivets still quite sharp will actually help aid it looking like a higher resolution texture than it actually is. So make these smaller details just a bit bigger, so that you can have a little bit more detail on them. And then I'm going to just make a little slot, like some sort of maybe card reader or something like that, or ticket dispenser maybe. I mean, this probably isn't the best way of doing this. A different way of doing this could be that you could start with a cylinder, make sure that it has edges that split across so that you can quarter it, and then select those edges across the middle and then bevel them, and then you can drag this sideways like that. Grab these top faces, delete that, and then mesh display reverse, and then grab the outer edge and extrude with the scale. And now we have a nice perfect curve on either side, so it's really symmetrical. So that's another way of doing that. So if you've got edges like this and you've got these hard pieces here, that will show up in your Substance Painter paint. So if you get something with, like, if you get metal and you want some edge wear around the edge, then you're going to end up having it here as well, because it's going to think that they're edges. So make sure that you're definitely checking over your models and softening edges like that, so that you don't get, because you might not see it all that much in just a grayscale like this, but once you get texture on there, the procedural edges, it'll show up like a sore thumb. So you just need to be making sure that you don't have anything like that. And I see that in people's portfolio work all the time, and it stands out to me instantly, and it will stand out to other artists as well. So if you're sending your portfolio in to be reviewed, they're going to be able to see that, and straight away it just makes you seem a little bit more amateurish. So definitely make sure that you're paying attention to stuff like that. Now again, just remember the topology doesn't really matter so much on this. So you don't need to be really neat. This isn't going to be in the game. This is just going to be used as a high poly to bake down. So here I'm just going to add some restraining edges so that I can subdivide this and make it a lot more smoother. And it doesn't matter about the topology for this stuff, because this is just the high poly. This is what is going to be baked down onto our plane in Substance Painter, so I can have as dense a meshes as I want. Okay, so we've got a few little details here. We've got our panels laid out in a basic way with no details on the panels, but it's a really good basis. So we can start to prep this to take it into Substance Painter and do our initial bake. So one of the things we need to do is come back to our original tile here and just open our UV editor. Okay, and then we just want to make sure that it's the correct orientation. So to do that, if we just solo that for now, so that's all we've got on screen. If we go to the edge mode and grab the top edge, we want to make sure that top edge is at the top of our UV panel. So that way, when we bake these out, they're not going to come out rotated or anything like that. It'll be just much easier to work with, because it's going to represent exactly what we've got in our Maya scene. So before we take this in, we need to color code these to make easier selections within Substance Painter. So what we can do is go to Mesh Display again, and we can go back to the Apply Color, and then we can work our way through these and apply different colors. Now I'm going to group them by type. So anything that's chrome, I'm going to give a certain color. So I would definitely want that to be chrome, and one of them. And chrome is going to be something throughout a lot of this, so I at least want one of these panels to be chrome as well. So I'm going to probably pick this one. So I'm just going to go to the light one and apply that, and then I want my painted metal. So then I'm just going to go over the rest of these panels and color code them depending on what they are to match the ATM, the vending machine. And then the decals and the things that are going to be alpha, I'm going to attach a nice red to them so they're easy to identify, but I may come back to them later on and change them depending on what material I finally want them to be made out of. So here I've decided I didn't like the size of this trim piece for the plastic, so I've made it smaller, and I'm going to make a couple of variations as well to go with it so that I can get it nice around the bottom strip of that ATM machine. And I've got a couple of choices, and this is a iterative process, so you will get used to coming back and changing things until finally you've got a trim sheet that works well across multiple items. So you can see I've got a gap here, maybe ready for something else in case I feel like this isn't working. And I don't have to worry that there's gaps there at the moment, because like I say, we can easily add to this later on. All right, so now we're ready to take this into Substance Painter and begin. Okay, so now we're ready to take this into Substance Painter, get it baked, and get some base materials on it so that we can start slapping it onto this. Okay, so there's one other thing that I need in here. So the glass on this will probably be best putting onto a separate map. That way you can have different things displayed on the monitor. Maybe it's interactive, so you'd want to do it through blueprints and stuff. But just so that we can have a finished model here, I'm going to make a little area on here that represents that monitor. And this is only going to be the glass, but it does have a nice rounded edge. So I'm going to put a bevel in this. And then I'm also going to just give the entire outer side a little bevel as well, so that we can get that nice chiseled look to the edge of that glass like you get on some mobile phones. So now we've got all that, we're basically ready for our first pass of textures. So we can now take this into Substance Painter, bake it down, apply our different groupings so that we can get some material split up on this. And then we can bake that out and slap it on our little model here.